this project in Georgia that I started, I think about 12 years ago, is called the Parent Leadership Support Project, based upon the values and ideals of social role valorization that Darcy outlined in the beginning, and the work of Dr. Wolfenberger and its relationship to devaluation. It includes lots of concepts and structures of law. Anybody who graduated from the Mislay Advocacy Project could find any section in the 3 major laws that we use and explain it. But even more, they knew what they were advocating for, which turns out to really be the hard part. And it uses the law, this project, to leverage the good things in school by using the law. So what are the things that we want for our students, and this holistic, somebody mentioned this holistic idea, and advocating for students through that. And it's very different than parent training. I had another kind of conversation about this, and somebody was like, but advocate training and parent training are really different. The competencies that you need to help your own child, like, you know everything there is to know about your child, and you know all the people and all the ins and outs, and you're there for the long haul. When you're doing parent advocacy, when you're doing advocacy for somebody else's child, you want to come in, you want to know the right amount of information, you do not want to know it all. You want to learn how to set up an advocacy relationship with somebody and when you will exit that relationship. People, that is always really hard. If you've ever had an advocate that's really good, it's not something you want to give up. And you're checking your own biases. You are not trying to practice law. We teach people about unauthorized practice of law and what the practice of law is as a safeguard for them, not because I'm particularly afraid. And really supporting people and ongoing in their competency. So as a parent, you may know about your child's specific strengths and needs and skills and accommodations and maybe disability specific information. But as an advocate, you're learning all the time. And so, for instance, we had many parents who were in the project who said, I have a child with autism, and I'm really had a lot of what's going on in that field. And in this work, I think I want to stand beside people who have experienced a traumatic brain injury or have more intensive needs around that, because I do this a lot in my life. And then other people say, well, I know so much, I want to be involved in that. And some people would say to me, listen, I really cannot advocate on behalf of people who have a very significant psychiatric disability. My mother did, and it was and that relationship was very challenging for me, and that would be very uncomfortable for me. So parent advocacy and advocating for other people's children, not the same stuff. So I think that's one place where when people look at this project, they go, really? That's what you did? Because it's pretty intense, but there's a reason. So the project took about 3 months, and it was about 52 hours of curriculum and instruction, which is a lot, but if you want to support volunteers to take on a role and do the job well, and to know each other, and to be in relationship with each other, and to kind of develop their personal style and interests, you need some time to marinate. There are a lot of people who are deeply into distance learning. I love technology in those pieces, but we definitely think there's a lot to be said for personalism, and this project had a lot of time together. We had weekly presentations. We had the presentations on Tuesdays or Thursday mornings. Anybody want to guess from a curriculum design why we did it on Tuesday or Thursday mornings? So, I forgot the punchline, but the punchline is we wanted people to go, we asked people to commit to go to 6 school-based meetings on behalf of other people's children. I just realized I haven't said that yet. So IEP meetings and 504 meetings and manifestation determinations and all these types of school meetings that are held on weekday mornings. So one of the program design pieces was to make sure that people could access that time off, and it was amazing. We had long distance truck drivers that could always be home on Thursday mornings, and people who worked the night shift, and stay at home parents, and people with and some people just took vacation. 3 hours on Thursday. I mean, it was interesting, but there was a real program design piece. People would say, I can't come. I can't get off every Thursday morning. Like, okay. Okay, good. Because we want to make sure people have the ability to stand beside kids in schools. So There were 3 groups that were participated in the project. The first group were ordinary citizens that wanted the good things in life for people with disabilities. They're people who wanted to do civil rights work and who believed strongly in a quality education for all students. That was a challenging group to recruit for me because most of my contacts were people with disabilities. The second group was adults with disabilities or people who had kind of survived the school system, and very powerful, added a lot of learning to the room. And additionally, when they went to IEP meetings and told people how it helped them, certain types of supports and the right kinds of supports, that's enormously powerful. Additionally, parents of kids with disabilities, and in your resource materials, you have our application. We had 4 or 5 applications for each opportunity. It was a highly competitive program, and we screened very hard for parents who just wanted to be super advocates for their own children, or they only want to be super advocates for just one very narrow issue through the application process and interviews. It's a very large investment from a nonprofit perspective to make to somebody. You don't need 52 hours of training to be a really great advocate for your child, and that would have really co-opted kind of the process and the community. Any questions? Okay, and so people agreed to go to a minimum of 6 IEP meetings in the following year after they completed the training. So this is a quote that I really love, and I'll just read it to you. It's worth it. There's no safety net that can bear the weight of human indifference. And I have yet to encounter a safety net of laws, rules, regulations, and policies that was any stronger than a single concerned and engaged person standing shoulder to shoulder with a person navigating the daily challenges of life in the community.
It's a great one.
It really isn't. If you know Lance Sundrum, he's come to our office and done training for us before. And it's true, and I believe that deeply. I am an attorney that believes with every ounce of my being that families and kids with disabilities need ordinary citizens to stand beside them to help leverage the good things in schools. And so this program was designed with those assumptions. We don't need more lawyers. Not that there's anything wrong with lawyers, and lawyers did go through this, by the way, couple. But what we really need is we need to grow the capacity. And so we'll talk for a minute about that. And so let's talk about our assumptions. I'm assuming that y'all know at this point what those are. And we talked about this already. And we've also talked about devaluation. So these are in your book, so if you want to take a look at them. And we talked yesterday about devaluation. We talked about devaluation and the wounds that people experience a lot, and how schools can do that, and how parents can do that, and how other systems can do that. All students have meaningful gifts and contributions, and that every student is an important and valuable member of the school community. Now, this sounds like something everybody would agree with, but when you start unpacking people's assumptions, there are a lot of people that will struggle with some of these ideas. Valued social roles are the best mechanism for social integration. So the idea is that it's not that going to a special room down the hall and being a part of that is what's going to keep you safe or secure or have the good things in life. For many students, the valued social role was just being a 4th grade student, to just be a 9th grade student, and all of the different things that went along with that. And even more, we worked really hard with volunteer advocates to keep on pushing that idea. So if you start off as a member of the drama club, what might you do next year in the leadership of the drama club? And to continue thinking about how one role might lead to another role, and how for most of us, almost all of us, school had that opportunity to try on different things, and that kids with disabilities should have those same opportunities. We've already talked about this presumption that a local school is the place where students belong, and that was a theme throughout every bit of this training. And the syllabus for the training is in your resource materials, if you wanted to see exactly how we did it, because we won't have time to go into that. So this is mind-blowing for some people, especially we were talking at lunch about COPA. If you've ever heard of COPA, it's Council of Parent Attorney Advocates. It's the National Parent Advocacy Membership Organization, and they would really disagree with this. The idea that more services do not equate a better education or a higher quality of life. And in the world of special ed, that would, and advocacy, that would be something that that would be really changes people's mindset about what are the good things that we need for kids. Enhancing the competency of both advocates and students lessens the likelihood of devaluation. So we really heavily, in the program design, invested in advocates. For example, the person GAO hired to do the training and provide the technical assistance was an attorney that had a lot of experience working with families. And also an attorney, and I think the project needed an attorney, but not a snotty attorney. You know, like not like you can kind of sort of do some stuff and then you really need to hand it over to an attorney. But an attorney who said, parents hold these legal rights, families enact these legal rights. You can do this, and you can stand beside people to do this, and you will be so much better for it, and they will too. And that's a really, I think oftentimes a lot of, unknowingly, a lot of advocacy by lawyers is really telling other people to kind of back away from that. And so, if you're thinking about lay advocacy, the values that underlie your work, I'm sure you're all familiar with values. I love this. I saw this on Instagram recently. People say a lot, so I watch what they do. So I did a lot of research in the beginning about volunteer advocacy programs. You wouldn't get over it. It was like, come for 3 hours or watch this webinar and you're a volunteer. And I was like, what are we saying about what people need? You know, these students are so deeply devalued and so at risk and really having hard things happen. They really needed people that had a lot of different types of skills to stand beside them. So we've talked a little bit about voluntarily unpaid relationships. So we screened very hard in our application that let's say you went to IEPs as part of your job and you really wanted to be good at it, and we really would like you to be good at it. Like let's say you worked at the juvenile court in probation, or you were an OT and a great OT. But let's say you were in a kind of a related field and you really wanted to be good at IEPs. All those people love to apply. But we wanted to build capacity. We wanted people that weren't currently going to IEP meetings and it wasn't paid as part of their job. Grassroots, parent leadership, and the idea of citizen advocacies. So that if citizen advocacy is important to you, then as an agency you need to invest in citizen advocacy. Independence. So we looked for presenters and locations and funding sources that were independent. So for example, the State Bar of Georgia, the legal profession certification, they sponsored it, which is a very kind of neutral image. And the Council on Developmental Disabilities is also a sponsor of the project, and some other types of groups. But even at times when I was really friendly with DOE folks and they said, Department of Education folks, and they said, you know, can we be involved? And we had speakers come from DOE. And there was definitely, but this image of being independent was very important. Identification, loyalty to the students. So there's a real focus on you're standing in the shoes of the student. What would it feel like to be the student every day in that classroom? What's that program feel like? How does it feel to be lonely? So I think a natural instinct for people standing beside a family is to say, what does it feel like to be that mother? What does it feel like to be that father? But there are times, especially as advocates, and I've talked to a lot of people in this room that have a ton of experience in advocacy already, that those are definitely in conflict. Thank you. They're in conflict. So especially in transition age, I would get a 16-year-old, the mother would say, I want them to be, a 16-year-old that was expelled, let's say. And the mother would say, I really want my child to go back to high school and finish, get them back in school. I say, okay, we'll think about that. We sit down and talk to the kid. Do you want to go back to school? No. Would you be willing to go to school if I got you back in? No. What if we got this and this and this and this? No. Would you be interested? No. Okay, well, let's talk about GED. Let's talk about joint enrollment in a community college. Let's talk about other schools. And a kind of a traditional kind of advocacy focus would be like, the parent said that's what they want, that's what they want. But when you're standing in the shoes of the kid, you really have to think about what does the student want. So we had a whole session on how do you get to know a student. And we came up with interview questions. We practiced interviewing, and we thought about different ways to communicate with people that communicate in different ways. And that was pretty powerful for folks. Also trying to do school-based observation and trying to spend time with the student without the family. And that sometimes it'd be in somebody's living room or, you know, at a McDonald's playground, or, you know, there were a lot of very creative ways. But that really was important to develop this sense of interpersonal identification with the student. And that was challenging, and in that room, The adults with disabilities kept on pulling it back. It kept people much more honest, right? You can imagine. Asset thinking instead of focus on deficits. I was so excited to meet Cheryl at this conference because the first article I ever read explaining the least dangerous assumption, we used that article on the first day of PLSP that she wrote based on Anne something's work. And so that the least dangerous assumption is something that every PLSP graduate would be able to articulate to you and how that impacts educational planning. We also taught people how to write IEP goals and other types of educational programming goals, incorporating valued social roles into the goals and outcomes. And we also taught advocates how to work with families to write vision statements, like Darcy talked about earlier. Another value is that individual advocates receive quality ongoing support are more effective. So we used a variety of different methods to continually provide support and technical assistance. So I think another problem with a lot of volunteer management programs is, here, come to training, see you later, good luck. And so there are a lot of ways, and truthfully, what was really powerful for me is I started the program, and I think maybe year 3 or year 4, I went out on a 4-month maternity leave. And I was like, what will they do? I'm so important. Who are they going to ask questions to? And it was just amazing how many people stepped up to partner. I actually think it was so good that I backed off. And that really has continued to be true. Another value, devalue people, have a valued person standing beside them, are safer. And we've seen that constantly. Where do I have to go? So best practices when seen will be aspired to and will develop thoughtful advocacy. So these were different ways we created inclusive classrooms. I have to tell you, I learned the principles of UDL during the creation of this curriculum and the rewrite of the curriculum, because if you name a certain types of accommodations, we made many, many, many accommodations. It was the room, it was the education we wanted people to emulate, right? The power of role modeling. Eventually, the people who were in the class became the speakers. That was a lot longer process. We did a lot of role modeling. So let's say you had a whole class on students cast as a deviant. So students who people thought were problem students or were thought of as to be criminal, right? So we had a whole session. Other people call that FBAs and BIPs, but it's really not the problem. The real issue is everybody thinks the student is deviant. And so we had a whole session on that, and it ended with, in the last 45 minutes, 3 different small groups of playing out different types of meetings and conversations. A meeting with a family where the family insists the kid's really, is dangerous and problem. A meeting at school that's way before a manifestation, which is really where you need to be advocating. And then a meeting at the school like that, and then graduates would be coaching people through those that were the right graduates, that knew how to do it well and that had a lot of experience. Then giving people their card and saying, you can hit up against these kinds of issues, call me, I'll help you. And giving people confidence that they could go to a meeting and do that. And there are other practices that we used, the power of role modeling, but it's very important. And so I already talked a little bit about how we began. The curriculum material is in your stuff. The recruitment was very important. Eventually, the first couple times the recruiting was pretty intense and maybe occasionally painful, to be truthful. But once you got going and people knew that you had such a wonderfully solid product, people want to be part of that community. I want to be part of the advocate community in Georgia. And there were many people that I knew that were doing advocacy work. They were the people that everybody went to in the waiting room, or the people that all your friends went to bounce their ideas off of, right? Or you sent the email first to say, should I send this email to the teacher? They were those people, and they were totally unsupported. And they were thirsty for information. And those folks have been our most powerful supporters over time. Yes.
Quick question. Is this on the website? It's not in
Sorry, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
And we also have the Parent Leadership Support Projects on Facebook, if you want to like that, and we could push more information out on that. And we still are doing continuing education and technical assistance for those folks. Eventually, we had 9 cohorts, about 30 people in a cohort that have helped. Our last data count was probably 4 or 5 years ago. At that point, it was 10,000 families in Georgia. So it was a very successful project, and I wanted to leave you with a couple different things that some of the outcomes, they were incredible. And so one thing I would say to you is the goal was standing beside people at IEP meetings, and that for sure happened, lots of it. What we didn't really anticipate, and it wasn't part of the program design, and if you look at the curriculum, you'll see legislative advocacy is not in there. Well, one person from first class, Sandy, thought that ASL should be, American Sign Language, should be a foreign language. And well, it should be, but in Georgia it wasn't. Maybe Nebraska it is. And so she, with many other PLSP graduates and other folks they brought to the work, got a legislative rule passed and got ASL as a foreign language in Georgia, and then started to push different schools to offer it. And so you can see how on so many levels that is creating the beloved society, the community and schools that we want, right? Kids can access this kind of, another type of language, that people can communicate with each other, that it's valued. Another outcome is we had 2 people run for school board. I thought it was incredible. I mean, that was something I never even imagined. It wasn't something we talked about, but as people started to see themes and feel their power and their interests, we had people go to law school. That was not a goal either, but at least 4 people went to law school, and I had to tell you, I got to write all their recommendations. It was just wonderful. And although the project is a volunteer advocate project, I make a living off my work, and people did a lot of volunteer work, and many people went into the field. And that was also pretty thrilling because I had colleagues that worked at the PTI and at different other places that we had the same values, conversations and values to work together, and it almost percolated it out. We also had somebody who won CASA Volunteer of the Year because she decided she really wanted to be more involved on behalf of kids who were stuck in that system. And just lots of incredible outcomes. And the other thing that was so interesting is I think a lot of people realize it's very hard to advocate for your own child. I've definitely struggled with that, and I consider myself an expert at it. And so lots of people paired up and had really wonderful relationships with other people within the project, and it really lightened their own advocacy work to have somebody who they also had similar values and to be able to pair up and move through that. Additionally, I think many parents, and this eventually became explicit, had a vision of what a good life would look for their youngster through their interaction and opportunity to be in class with people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. It's an experience that many people had not had. So that was another kind of powerful teaching tool. We did lots of evaluations. We evaluated each session. We evaluated the whole session. Darcy and Michael Kendrick came and did something called a model coherency evaluation between, I think, class 5 and 6. That was really instructive and gave me a really great opportunity to really enhance the project. And we did a fair amount of change every time. We stuck with the basics, though. We started on a Saturday for 7 hours. We met 3 hours on a weekday for 10 weeks, and we ended on a Saturday with a big graduation because they're taking on the role of a volunteer advocate, and that's a big deal. And so those are some more of the outcomes.
Wait a minute,
Go back. It is. I mean, it has been some of my favorite and best work. And the other thing I didn't really mention, but I really should, is so like one of the things I did is I led this thing called the Safe Schools Initiative, where we got the use of seclusion outlawed in Georgia and greatly limited the use of restraint. That work was only possible through the Army that I wanted to support. So if you can see it, so this is like 4 years after the first cohort, but the PLSP graduates who have been doing work to stop the use of restraint and seclusion came with me to these letter writing meetings to get public comment, and we would travel wherever, and they bring their laptops and they work with families to help write up people's stories, and they help find the families to meet with the school board members to explain and prep the student, not just the parents, but the student, to explain what it felt like to get restraint and seclusion instead of education and prom. And so a lot of like the work I've gotten to do since then has been involved with a whole cadre of people that care about the same issues and have a deep level of trust and a background. And the GNET's work that I'm doing right now was also totally informed by that work. When I said we met with families all over the state, the DOJ, when they came to town, we had to meet with families to hear their stories. That was through that network I was able to access those stories, right? So it's kind of, it's almost a, you know, just kind of deep reservoir of advocacy power. But it takes a lot of investment, as it should, because the work is really hard. So I spent also a lot of time supporting people to have good boundaries around texting is like the worst thing ever. You know, around if you are a volunteer, how do you limit that and enter and out and a lot of those kind of practices. Any questions?
Tons, but no.
Well, I'm sure you'd be glad to have conversations with people about it, right?
I love this work, and I definitely think that there's no court case or legal effort I've been involved in that has had anywhere near the kinds of outcome and benefits that this work has had. Additionally, when you're thinking about paid and unpaid advocacy, if tomorrow I decided to go make widgets, you know, that, and, or the GAO tomorrow, the Georgia Protection Advocacy Agency, is unfunded tomorrow, it's done, it's over with. This investment lives on, you know, beyond us. And what was very, the retention numbers were just incredible. I kind of sometimes I'm glad I started it when I was really young and not really that afraid of failure, because, you know, who knew that people would be in it and in it so much for the long haul. And I think, you know, people would always say, before I did it, people were like, nobody's gonna come for 50 hours. Oh, by the way, if you missed 2 sessions, I kicked you out. I'm not kidding. Like, I was serious. I mean, we were investing in people. And people are like, well, I have a kid with a disability. Yeah, everybody else does too. And when you go to an IEP meeting for somebody else's kid that has a disability, you have to be reliable. So, right, I mean, you have to, your cars have a problem, so what the manifestation is today, what you gonna do? You know, you've gotta figure it out. So, so it really, I'd love to talk about it anytime, anywhere.
Let me tell you about New Hampshire's leadership initiative, and we take money from anybody. So we have a few more bells and whistles. This program used to be called New Hampshire Family Leadership when it began in 1988, but after the first, I guess, 5 years or so, it expanded to include some adult self-advocates with disabilities. So we just changed it to the New Hampshire Leadership Series. And it's a year-long leadership institute for families and self-advocates who either have children with a label of developmental disability or the adult, him or herself, has that label. In all those years, we have about 900 graduates who are out in the state, including our current governor, which is always kind of cool. This program was modeled after the state of Minnesota's, it's called Partners in Policymaking. And I understand there used to be a Partners project here in New Hampshire, in Nebraska, but there isn't anymore. So, yeah. So ours has some differences in that it is specifically inclusion focused, and we think of it broadly as inclusion for kids in school, but also inclusion of kids when they get out of school and the adults who are in the program, their own inclusion in whether it's college or work or residential options, houses, homes, apartments. And the goal is to prepare individuals to advocate for school and community inclusion, not only in their own lives, but also in the lives of other people. So you certainly can use the skills that you gain in leadership for yourself, your child, your own family, but the expectation is that you want to go beyond that. And it began in 1988, and I was involved in that very first leadership cohort. And I would say that this leadership program has been the single most influential driver of inclusive education in the state of New Hampshire. So I agree with you, it's very powerful. We have about 30, 35 parents come to every session. The sessions are monthly for a day and a half. They start at midday Friday and end at the end of the day Saturday, so there's an overnight involved. There's no cost to the participants. People who are able can donate, and we ask for a $250 donation, but a lot of people don't. The funding that we raise also covers childcare for family members who would not be able to attend if they didn't have those childcare financial resources. Every person in the 30-person big group is also a member of what's called we call it a home group. And that's a group of people who, throughout the course of the year-long training, do a lot of small group discussion and activities in that group. And those groups may end up staying together when it comes time to plan a very action-focused activity, or the groups may reconfigure themselves when it comes that time so that people are in an action group that really represents their passions and their interests. We have a whole website, and if you Google New Hampshire Leadership, there's also another New Hampshire Leadership series, and thankfully neither group has wanted to sue the other group. But if you do New Hampshire Leadership Disability, you would get to our website, and you'll be able to see, like, there's a little film about leadership, and there's lots of events and data and so on. And certainly, John, if you're interested in looking at our curriculum materials, I can give you access to that. It's a password protected thing right now. Between these monthly sessions, people have homework, and the homework could be watch something, it could be read something, it could be talk to somebody, it could be go to visit some place. And here are the topics that are covered. We spend the very first session talking about the history of people with disabilities in New Hampshire. And we actually hold that session on the grounds of the now closed New Hampshire State Institution. And the guest speakers are people who used to live there. So it's very powerful. I mean, you see the holes in the concrete walls where they used to have the big iron things that chains could be attached to. You see wards, you see everything is a tile or a linoleum floor. You can see congregate bathing situations where people just got in there in groups of 20 and somebody took a garden hose. So very powerful stuff. There's also a video available that's called, I think it's called The Closing of Laconia State School. Really powerful video, lots of old images that preserves that heritage, because I don't know who said it, like, if you don't, you're doomed to repeat it. If you don't understand your history, you're doomed to repeat it. So we think that history part's really important. We talk about different ways of looking at this thing that society calls disability. And we try to contrast the medical model, where you're either sick or you're deviant or you're broken, with a variety of different models, ending up with thinking about disability as a natural part of the human experience. And again, just like I said with inclusive education, we feel like, I don't know if it's we walk the line, but on one hand, those of us who are in charge of leadership really understand and support people whose disability is the central core of their identity. So while I use person-first language, I say person with a disability, absolutely supportive of somebody who wants to say I'm an autistic person. I'm a whatever person. But we also support the idea that much of what our society calls disability, we've made it up. We've socially constructed it. Best example I can give you is there's Anne sitting in her wheelchair. If this room for the last 2 days had no tables and chairs in it, And all of you guys had to stand throughout these 2 days. And there's Ann, sitting in her wheelchair. Who has the disability? Who will experience the challenge? All you guys who have no place to sit. So we share with people that that's another view of disability. It's just sort of the way we've constructed the world, and there's no reason we can't construct it in a different way. We do a lot on what's called person-centered planning, a lot on the legislative process. We teach people about visioning, reclaiming your dream. There's a number of sessions on best practices in inclusive education and in adult-supported lives. And also a significant emphasis is on community organizing. So our graduates are change agents, not just around inclusive education, but they've gotten changes in laws, changes in policies, started a statewide newspaper for families of people with disabilities, joined school boards, wrote grants, created accessible playgrounds, obviously do a lot of one-to-one work with families and help them get an inclusive ed. Dan Habib, who's the filmmaker of Including Samuel, is a leadership graduate. We eliminated for some years the waiting list for adult services in New Hampshire and much more. And the funding and the support is more for John to look at where we've gotten our funding over the years. So the small group leaders are people who are former graduates of leadership.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the things that we do in Alberta, and it's unfortunate, in fact, that people keep taking up my time, but there's not much I can do about that, actually. So part of the challenge in trying to isolate one of the things that we do is that I'm not always quite sure when you take out just one of the initiatives that we have, how well that actually would be able to be replicated, if you want, outside of both our culture and the fact that it's in the midst of a much larger context. So we too, for example, have a family leadership series, have had one for 15, 16 years now, but I don't get to talk about it. So we'll move on. But just to give you a sense of the various initiatives that we have. So there's a number of them, and I can't get that to work either, so I won't use that. So I just wanted to give you, we are in our province, in fact, we're the principal reason that there is inclusive education to the degree that there is. Okay? We have helped craft the actual legislation that provides for a regular classroom to be the first placement option for students with at least special needs or disabilities. We influence and impact pretty much all the legislation and policy making that takes place around at least intellectual disability. But I want to focus more specifically on what we do as we see ourselves as a partner, although we're an advocacy body. And occasionally we are involved in adversarial advocacy with respect to school systems, and sometimes that's been through the courts as well. By and large, we are able to work in partnership with at least most school systems throughout our province. So we have inclusive education and consultants on staff. One of the advantages that they have, in fact, is they do nothing else but learn about how to provide support to teachers in terms of UDL design. Right? So they don't have to be in front of a classroom. They don't have to spend their days actually teaching. What they do is develop an amazing bank of resources. They work across ages, across school systems, across the province. And it's all provided free to school systems, school districts, etc. So we'll go into a classroom, we'll co-teach with a teacher, we'll model, we'll help them think through a particularly challenging problem. How do I modify or adapt this particular curriculum? How do I include this child? We'll work with the school systems consultants as well, and they'll provide training, whether it's to teachers or to educational assistants. And so obviously with over 2,000 schools, we only have a few education consultants, but so they're fairly busy. We're just about, I think, to get another one actually. We've developed what we call an interactive in-service. So it's not like what I do here, which is preferable to me. It's just a lecture. I don't care whether people are in the room or not. And do an in-service for administrators, actually, on how to create a welcoming school, which you think might be obvious, but isn't. And we did that actually in cooperation with principals and administrators we already know to be welcoming. So we've interviewed them, taped them, etc. We taped parents in terms of their experiences. We did it in cooperation. Cass is our College of Alberta School Superintendents and with our Department of Education. So it all has, if you want, their stamp of approval and support. And we can go out to various opportunities that CAS conferences, for example, and provide training to superintendents, principals, assistant, associate superintendents, etc., on how do you create a welcoming school. For example, when a principal says to you, well, have you looked at the special ed classroom? Okay, they don't know the moment they've said that, suddenly they've lost the trust of that family or parent just by offering choice. Right? They don't know necessarily why that parent is suddenly reacting emotionally. As if parents have come in without knowing what the choices and options are when they're choosing inclusive education. It's so we try to have a number of things we do with educators. We have had a summer institute on inclusive education for, I don't know, how old am I? For a long time. For decades, actually, in cooperation with the University of Calgary. It's a small institute, but it fills up every year. And we offer bursaries, particularly people from out of town, teachers, educators, administrators, parents who want to attend the Summer Institute. There are courses on how to modify and adapt curriculum, how to accommodate students with challenging behaviors in the regular classroom, and the ethics of inclusion, inclusive education, which we actually think is much more of a moral issue than that overrides, in our view, a rights approach to inclusive education. It's graduate, undergraduate, not for credit, and
it's lovely because the parents are also part of this.
Right.
There are other institutes that are really quite professionally focused that I'm aware of, but this one is quite beautiful because it's, groups of people together.
And for teachers, it can boost their standing in the pay grids, right, as they add to their educational credentials. We, yes, sorry, thank you. Yeah. It's a stipend or what is it? A loan that you don't have to pay back. It's not quite a scholarship. That's right. Right, and so we have an annual family conference, one of the largest actually in the country, if not the largest in the country, and each of the 2 days of that conference, one day is devoted to inclusive education in its the entirety of the day, and we bring in some of the top people in the world on inclusive education, so it attracts a lot of teachers, parents, and educators. So it's a family conference, so it's both teachers and educators, administrators, et cetera, that attend that. And we also offer discounts to teachers, schools, and school districts in terms of being able to send people so that because they often have to provide then for a substitute or a supply teacher. I'm not sure what language you would use here for that. And those experts are actually then, because we're bringing them, we're paying for them, we'll then share them. So we'll have them meet with our government people and talk about issues of inclusive education. We'll generously share them with school districts who want to utilize them as well. Sorry. You notice you didn't do that with others. I just want to point that out.
No, this is, actually, I attended the first family conference that they, was called something different then, but Inclusion Alberta sponsored, and Mary was baby. And I credit that conference with really just, I had the intellectual understanding, and that just totally buttressed, built, whatever you say, my clear image. And I met families at that conference who to this day are still an inspiration to me. So I can't say enough. Bruce, I know you don't have enough time to talk about it, but he always picks a theme. Sorry. That was not nice. I'm sorry. But it's such a good conference. I guess it's just what I'm just wanting to say. Like Bruce, always he's so thoughtful. He picks a theme, And he's bold about it. And one year the theme was how people's lives are being threatened and what families are doing to protect the lives of their family members, you know. So inclusive education is part of it, but it's usually a bigger theme, and families are leading, and families are speaking, and brothers and sisters, and mothers and fathers, and grandmothers and grandfathers, and aunts and uncles. And I think it's one of the best conferences I have ever seen, and very, very influential. So
We have people that come from all over the world actually to see our participate in the family conference, and it's a major source of renewal for families, right? I mean, you run into all kinds of challenges throughout the course of a year or over the course of years, and so an opportunity to come together. We have anywhere from 80 to 100 children in childcare. Just to give you an example of the size of the conference, we have a teen program, youth forum, and so on and so forth. I also want to mention that we also we have people nominate teachers or schools or school systems for a National Inclusive Education Award. And what was quite interesting to me, and then that's handed out by ourselves and with our National Association and with the Department of Education. And so what's been interesting is that, and this will be done at the conference and take some time out of the full-day workshop, but the numbers of people that come from a school when they're getting an award like this. So it's usually the parents, right, or the students that's nominated them, actually. And then they show up, okay, and maybe we're giving out 4 awards, 5 awards. The number of people that come with them fill another conference room. And they have to go in another conference room and wait to come in to see the award being handed out to a few people. So the superintendents come, the principals come, for example, other parents come, friends of the kids come, family members come, etc. And so a little bit of recognition, if you want, for some of the fabulous work that they're doing goes a long way, because typically that's not what they're hearing. I mentioned earlier we've influenced Alberta education, the policy, the legislation. In effect, government really can't do much without taking us into account. Now, it doesn't mean we get everything we want and we win everything, or we don't have to spend time on doing things, but the fact is we can't be ignored. Have to be paid attention to. We have a newsletter, of course, like other people have, that features issues on inclusive education and often quotes principals and teachers and what they've done. So we've had principals, as a result of our work, eliminate all the segregated classes in their school. We've had school districts move away from special education classrooms, and then they get to share in that newsletter how they came about to do that. Most of the work we provide individual on-the-ground advocacy. So we do the kind of advocacy Darcy described earlier at the systemic level, societal level, actually systems level, community levels, and actually individual and family level. And so we we'll go to school meetings with families, etc. Mostly what we're doing is mediation. I think one of the negotiation, right, trying to help parties listen to each other, figure out what would be the best way to accommodate a student in a regular classroom. I think, though, that what's a bit of a testimony for us, in a sense, is to our credibility, as opposed to seeing advocacy as always adversarial, is we frequently get calls from school districts when they haven't been able to work collaboratively with a parent. Probably the hardest work we do is rebuilding trust. Actually, it is the most challenging work that we do between school systems and families, or for Alberta education, including when they see terrible things happening in schools and find their methods of accountability are too limited to actually address them. They'll call us to go into a school to try to help the school or school system figure out how to do better. We, of course, do all kinds of presentations on inclusive education. We do them for families. We do them many of them across the province during the course of a year at local teacher conventions and national, international audiences. We have collaborations with some, at least, ongoing school districts where we'll have committees or structures set up that we have families sitting on. They'll work together on the local district policy. They'll address issues about how to improve inclusive education. Parents will be invited to the beginning days of school when the teachers and principals have arrived and are doing their orientation and in-servicing. Will be part of that part of that in-servicing, for example. We have a lending library. It's not like a formal library where you can actually read the material online. We don't have that kind of funding yet, but we'll take money from anywhere, like Cheryl. And your money goes a lot further in Canada. If you really want to see a benefit to us, you could do that. But so we have one of the largest collection of teacher materials and resources on inclusive education. Teachers can go online, look for the materials, they can request it, we'll send it out for free. We'll take their firstborn child, in order to get it back, things of that nature. Of course, inclusive post-secondary education you've already heard about, and other university partnerships on teacher education. So the universities in our province that do teacher education, pre-service education, will often have, whether it's our families that we're connected to or some of our staff or myself, come and offer in-services and lectures and opportunities for them to debate and discuss inclusive education. The other thing I'll mention as well is that we meet regularly with both the senior bureaucrats and the ministers of education. So we work really hard actually at building relationships across every level. So we will have every member of our legislative assembly over the course of the year will at least have met once or twice with families in their community, and one of those items on their agenda will be inclusive education. So when they get together in caucus, whether in opposition or in power, okay, they know us. We're on their agenda, and a necessity to pay some degree of attention. That gives us some influence we want as a grassroots advocacy